A signature of this metagame, and he's been using it to great effect with that Unburden ability after Focus Sash has been activated. So we're going to see the consistency of Riley go up against the volatility of Joe's team here. Basque Legion and King Gambit right off the bat for Riley, alongside the Jumpluff and the Typhlosion.
What's amazing is that both of them have saved their weather setters in potentially the back, and you have the opportunity to bring either the Torkoal or the Pelipper in to have that natural synergy with either of their partners.
I think advantage to Riley right now, though, because if you want to switch in your weather setter to boost up the weather abuser on your team, the King Gambit on Riley's side is slower than the Typhlosion. So if you do switch in your Torkoal or your Pelipper, Riley should get it in second, which means that the rain will stay on the field after Torkoal sets up the sun.
But you're still going to run the risk here of potentially having to deal with just the sheer firepower of this Basque Legion. And so Garchomp is going to come in and potentially weather an attack here from that opposing threat. We are going to see the King Gambit switch out as well, so both the King Gambit and the Hisuian Typhlosion saved for a little bit later, as when it rains, it can pour, and maybe this Basque Legion gets to show us why.
Pelipper hits the field, Drizzle is activated, and a Terastallization comes through right away. There will be no Sun, there will be no Torkoal on this first turn, and Basque Legion right off the bat going for that Terra Water, boosting up the power of that Wave Crash even further. And since rain is up, it should be acting first.
And it's going to be dealing a major amount of damage to either of these Pokemon, even if it's going to be resisted by the Jumpluff. And so, sorry Jumpluff, it is going to just get one hit knocked out here to that Basque Legion's Wave Crash.
If I had a nickel for every time a Wave Crash KO'd something that resisted it, I'd have 2 nickels, which
isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice.
Right? No, that is absolutely crazy damage. We've seen it time and again. This Terra Water Basque Legion with that Swift Swim ability to make it move quicker than its opponents is capable of knocking out even Pokemon that resist it, which makes it such a huge threat. Now that the Pelipper is on the field, though, the possibility for this Torkoal to switch in on Joe's side of the field is there, but you have to contend with taking a possible Wave Crash at the same time. Even if the sun goes up, this Terra Water Wave Crash will still do a ton of damage.
But that's where the Hisuian Typhlosion could potentially come into play, because if you do get the Torkoal in, you might be naturally faster than the Basque Legion, so you get a chance to actually move first, and we might actually have 3 nickels in this particular match.
True. The Wave Crash, we can kind of eruption there too. It's going to be interesting though. Pelipper does swap out, so Riley wants to be able to reset the rain later on in this game, should that be a requirement, but I don't believe Joe swapped either of his Pokemon, so rain stays active.
Okay, so we are just going to have to see this Typhlosion deal with this storm, even though it is going to take this Terastallization. What are you hoping for here?
I'm not sure what this buys you. You still keep the water weakness. You don't really gain anything from dropping the ghost typing in this instance. Basque Legion protects itself though. No damage coming out from Riley this turn.
So that's going to be really big here, because Garchomp actually went for the Dragon Claw into the Archaludon, and maybe a double up here from this Hisuian Typhlosion might be enough to actually knock out this Archaludon. You can see the nod, you can see the eruption though, and even though you're not going to be doing a whole lot, you still get a chance to actually get this damage down with this Fire Terra, even if it is in the rain.
That's a really bold play from Joe. If Riley had opted to go for an attack with that Basque Legion, he would have taken another knockout with Wave Crash into either of these Pokemon. The Eruption does come through because of the rain, is not enough to KO our Charlodon, but it's well in range for another attack from Garchomp or Typhlosion. I like that play from Joe a lot, because if you think about Riley, we talk about his consistency. He doesn't like to take big risks. That was a very safe play to make if you're Riley, and if you're Joe, already kind of on the back foot, losing that Jumpluff, you might have to make some of those riskier plays in order to get a foothold back into this game.
You still have a way to go through this, though. I mean, yes, this Basque Legion is still going to be fast. With the rain active, you are going to still have that Swift mobility, so you're going to be the fastest thing on the field. But there's still that opportunity to actually bring in the Torkoal, shut that off, and give a little bit more power behind this Typhlosion. Our Charlodon, though, doesn't want to stay around. It's going to be the Pelipper coming back in. Riley may be expecting that the Torkoal would have actually switched in at some point, but it's just going to be another Wave Crash. This poor Typhlosion, it is just going to get out of here.
How many times over do you think that knocked out the Typhlosion? Maybe 2 or 3?
Oh god, like, yeah, 3 times, I think. Probably at least.
Big Wave Crash sends Joe down to 2 Pokemon remaining, so if he does swap out this Pelipper and bring it back in later on, the rain will remain up for the rest of the game. Earthquake here coming out, though, from Joe. Good play, knowing that one of the Garchomp or the Typhlosion gets knocked out. And if the Typhlosion's already knocked out, you can't do any damage to it with your own Earthquake. You finally take out this Basque Legion after it takes 2 one-hit KOs with that Wave Crash.
Yeah, but you're in this awkward position where if you're Joe, you have just 2 Pokemon remaining. The Garchomp does have a couple of other tricks that it can go for, though. It does have Stomping Tantrum as well as Dragon Claw, and you now have set the sun for at least 2 turns for you to be able to take advantage of that, while Riley's going to have to manually switch out that Pelipper.
The Garchomp is still pretty healthy as well. I don't think one Sucker Punch from this King Gambit should be able to knock it out before it can get off at least one more attack. And neither trainer has Terastallization available to them anymore, which means if Joe wants to use Earthquake with his Garchomp, he's got to either allow Torkoal to take that damage, which you really don't want, or protect it, which means that you might not be able to do as much as you might like to on that turn.
King Gambit's going to go for the Protect. It's going to buy itself one more turn as the Pelipper retreats to be able to set the rain just a little bit later. But Joe's going to get this knockout for free because Riley has to sacrifice this Archaludon to get the Pelipper back in this next turn.
A very worthy sacrifice. I think you really want that rain back up so this Torkoal is much less of a threat. And also, you want this Pelipper on the field in front of that Garchomp so you have that immunity to those ground-type moves. You have to make Joe think twice before going straight for those Earthquakes and even possibly sacrificing his own Torkoal to get damage out, because Earthquake and Stomping Tantrum will now both deal no damage to this Pelipper. This is still not a one game for either player because this King Gambit on Riley's side, again, cannot Terastallize away from a ground weakness. This Garchomp from Joe is Life Orb and will do a lot of damage to King Gambit, possibly enough to take it out in one hit, but of course Sucker Punch still on the table. You can try and get some damage out before it gets knocked out, and if you're Riley, I think you have to focus this Garchomp because Pelipper will beat this Torkoal 1v1 pretty easily.
So you're kind of having to hedge your bets a little bit here if you're Joe. You want to make sure that you can try to get around something like that Sucker Punch just KOing you instantly, but this Torkoal is going to have to weave in damage somewhere, and because the rain is active, your 2 Fire-type attacks are going to be stunted pretty heavily.
You have to wonder if something like a Helping Hand Dragon Claw is enough to KO Pelipper. It is holding the Covert Cloak and not the Focus Sash like we sometimes see on it, so maybe that's your out here if you're able to KO Pelipper before it could possibly get a Weather Ball off.
That's big though, because the Sucker Punch is going to fail this time around because it was going into this Garchomp, which will be protected thanks to, of course, the Protect that it went for. And if you go for the Burning Jealousy into the King Gambit, it's going to at least help do a little bit of damage, but you got to stall out the number of Sucker Punch power points you've got here.
That's true, and that little bit of chip damage also might be the difference maker between Stomping Tantrum when it KOing King Gambit or not. It's very possible that King Gambit's bulky enough that even a Life Orb Stomping Tantrum is not enough for a one-hit KO, but that Burning Jealousy could be the difference maker, and Helping Hand coming out here with this Garchomp, probably looking to KO this Pelipper.
Yeah, well, the Sucker Punch is going to have to try to get the KO here now, but it's not going to. And even if you weren't going to be able to get the knockout before with the Helping Hand, it's still going to be the Pelipper you go after. We're not going to find out if that mattered at all because a critical hit is going to ensure the knockout onto this Pelipper.
That is unlucky for Riley there. The critical hit obviously making that a clean one-hit KO, but you have to wonder if that mattered. Pelipper holding the Covert Cloak on this team might be trained to be a little bit more offensive, make great use of that Hurricane and Weather Ball in the rain. And maybe the Life Orb Garchomp with the Dragon Claw could have been a KO here, but because of that critical hit, should seal this game up for Joe. Even a Sucker Punch, could knock out this Garchomp before it attacks, but 2 overheats from Torkoal, even in the rain, should be enough damage to lock it up.
You also have Protect, so you're still playing the mind games of whether or not you're actually going to go for the Sucker Punch with the King Gambit. And when we see the Protect come out here, Riley kind of head in hands at this point because he did go for Sucker Punch again. And it's going to fail because the Garchomp wasn't going for an attack. That leaves another opportunity here for the Torkoal to get some damage down onto this King Gambit. And I don't know. I think you could just safely try to go for a double Protect here. That would just seal up the game even more here for Joe.
Yeah, I think 2 Burning Jealousies just ends the game regardless. Even if Riley happens to call this with a Kowtow Cleave into Torkoal, it's going to survive. You're going to be able to get off at least one more attack. Burning Jealousy will bring King Gambit down very low, and now a single Stomping Tantrum or Burning Jealousy is enough. A really smart call to use that Burning Jealousy instead of Overheat, because at this point, your one out, if you're Riley, is dodging an Overheat, which simply can't happen if you're using that 100% accurate Burning Jealousy.
Exactly, and so either way, you're going to go ahead and get the Stomping Tantrum into the King Gambit, and Joe Ugarte is going to win this first game of the best of 3 and top 4.
Really impressive play from Joe, even though the weather was almost never in his control, and after losing that jump off on turn 1 to a Wave Crash, kept his head in check and made sure that, maybe my Torkoal in the rain isn't as useless rather as you might expect. I've still got Helping Hand, I've still got some chip damage with that Burning Jealousy, and I think that the choice to be using that Burning Jealousy really important there because it was chipping things down into possible KO range, and of course that Helping Hand, huge difference maker.
This lead was really difficult for Riley to have to deal with as well, because you make a choice. Something's going to switch in, potentially. So do you want to go for the chlorophyll fast mode? Do you want to actually see if the sleep powder's going to come out? Or is it going to actually be the sun into the jump left slot? And then maybe you actually just see the Hisuian Typhlosion totally outpace you.
I do really like leading the Basket Legion with your King Gambit if you're Riley. King Gambit's probably the slowest thing on his team other than the Amoonguss, which might not be too great into like a Torkoal jump left kind of team. And by leading that King Gambit next to Basket Legion, unless Joe leads the Torkoal and sets up Sun on the first turn, nothing's going to be slower than that King Gambit, which would allow it to switch out after Riley's King Gambit. So that means if you switch in Pelipper on that first turn, you're guaranteed to get at least one powerful Wave Crash off with the rain up. If you use that to take out Jump Left, that's great. That's a lot of control you can assert over the rest of the game, unless by happenstance you happen to find yourself in the way of a critical hit helping hand Dragon Claw from a Garchomp. But I think that is a really smart lead from Riley. It just allows him to guarantee at least one turn of that Basket Legion attacking in rain, which can set you pretty far ahead, and it did. You just gotta, you know, maybe play the middle and the end of that game a little bit cleaner to secure that win.
It's tough because of Basket Legion, every time you use that Wave Crash too, you put yourself ever closer to getting knocked out. All of that recoil damage is going to start to stack up. And if you don't have something like an Amoonguss, maybe that would help you. Maybe Pollen Puff over to the Basket Legion, allow it to stay alive a little bit longer. But having to bring the Amoonguss in doesn't feel great when you're running into a team that has so many different answers to Amoonguss.
And even though Riley did take that big KO in the first turn, the Archaludon on Riley's team accomplished nothing really. It was kind of a damage sponge, which can be useful at times, but it didn't get to attack a single time, I believe.
Trade wasn't good enough.
Exactly. So you got to make better use of, I think, all of your tools. Even if you take a huge lead, if you let Joe back into the game by kind of sacrificing that Archaludon for no damage, that will be a great way to kind of let him back in.
Well, here comes the Amoonguss next to that Basket Legion for Riley in this game number 2, and for Joe, it is going to be that Jump Left and Garchomp once again to see if this is going to be the way to get the victory in this top 4 match.
Again, Amoonguss will be slower than Garchomp, so if both of those Pokemon swap out to the respective weather setters, rain will go up. Amoonguss does indeed switch out. Will we see the Pelipper come in here again? We, in fact, do. I wouldn't be surprised to see another Terra Water Wave Crash, Rosemary.
I wouldn't either, and so I think, unfortunately, either of these Pokemon being on the receiving end of that is going to be a knockout here for Riley, and there is that Terra. So these Wave Crashes, Aqua Jets, anything else are going to be further boosted ever more in the rain.
Of course, no switches happening for Joe, so whichever target this Wave Crash connects with should be knocked out in one hit. Garchomp will protect itself, though, hoping to catch Riley targeting it with this Wave Crash. And we'll see what happens. Wave Crash, though, into the Jump Bluff instead.
So the Jump Bluff, I'm so sorry, little friend. It's going to be another Pokeball KO for you. And we're still not going to get a chance to see the Jump Bluff do anything in either of the games that we've had so far. We can just see how much recoil this Basket Legion is going to have to take. Not just from the damage that it dealt from the Wave Crash, but also the Life Orb recoil. Gives Joe an opportunity, though, to bring in this Torkoal for free and now put Riley in a position where you've got to take those 2 turns to actually get the Pelipper back in and out.
The nice part about the eject pack here as well is that if Riley switches out the Pelipper and Wave Crash isn't able to KO Torkoal, you can go for that overheat, lower your special attack by 2 stages, and immediately switch out, which will give you a great way to pivot that Torkoal back in later. We did see the Typhlosion is the 4th Pokemon for Joe in this case, and because the Jump Left did go down, Tailwind is no longer an option, which means that some of the faster Pokemon on Riley's team might be able to outspeed that Typhlosion and threaten it with some damage before it can get off an eruption.
Yeah, or even if you just have that King Gambit in the back, you're going to have the Sucker Punch damage into the Typhlosion anyway, and then Eruption is still going to be mitigated. But as we head into the next turn of this game, Pelipper is going to just go away for a little while as our Archaludon comes back in to take its place. The last time this happened, Riley got burned by the fact that it was just going to have to take an attack on the income. And so this Archaludon does have to get hit with a Stomping Tantrum.
Nice call knowing that Pelipper likely switches out, but Basket Legion stays in, goes straight for this Wave Crash with the Terra Water boost and the Life Orb. Will it be enough to KO? And it's not! Torkoal barely hangs on, should be able to get off an overheat here.
That's if it's able to connect with this attack, and sure it does. So the overheat is going to be the double up that this Archaludon needed to get knocked out. And Torkoal also gets a chance to get out of here with that eject pack. And so you have to play this war again. Where in the world is this weather gonna go?
It's also another case where we've had both the Jumpluff and the Archaludon be knocked out before they can attack even once. Not really the greatest use of resources on either end, but if you are Joe in this case, I like this trade much better because we do see there is no King Gambit. The remaining Pokemon are that Basculegion, the Amoonguss, and the Pelipper. If you're Riley and you bring in the Pelipper here, that means that you can easily just swap that Torkoal back in the Garchomp slot. Typhlosion usually should outspeed the Basculegion and the Pelipper without any kind of Swift Swim modifiers, and that puts you in position to fire off some major eruptions. This Basculegion has taken so much recoil between the Wave Crash and the Life Orb that a single attack should be able to knock it out.
It's a really tough decision to have to make, because I think even if you bring the Amoonguss in, this Typhlosion is going to be able to do a lot, even through the rain that the Pelipper could set, and then Basculegion is still in this awkward position of having to come back in. Maybe even when Wave Crash is going to knock it out with all the recoil. Here's the Amoonguss, though, so this does give Riley those options. If you want to bring back in the Pelipper, you can, and this Basculegion could just go for a knockout into the Typhlosion or the Garchomp if it wants to.
I do think the Amoonguss is the smarter play for Riley here. It does give him the option to switch in the Pelipper on the Basculegion slot. Again, should be slower than both Typhlosion and Garchomp on Joe's end, and Rain will go up after a possible Torkoal switch. But at the same time, you're dealing with a Choice Specs Terra Fire Eruption. Even in the rain, that's going to do so much damage. And if you do opt to stay in with both of your Pokemon, you can double up that Amoonguss with a possible Dragon Claw or Stomping Tantrum to ensure it gets knocked out before it can possibly put anything to sleep.
I was going to say, Spore might be able to change things up here in just a little bit, but Riley's going to keep it as the last Pokemon potentially in his party as the Pelipper comes back in to take its place, set up the rain, and you're going to have to hope that this Basculegion can do enough in this game before it ends up getting knocked out. Here's the Terra commit, though, onto the Hisuian Typhlosion.
It will be able to boost the power of its fire-type attacks, but because rain does go up, Basculegion will have the chance to attack first. If Wave Crash goes into that slot, it will knock it out, but Last Respects instead. Not enough for the KO, but Eruption will be doing pitiful damage here.
You got the Dragon Claw into the Pelipper, and you can see just how much it's able to do, even without the Helping Hand, even without the crit.
Oh, no.
And both of these Pokemon are within range of this Hisuian Typhlosion, even with this Eruption.
Talk about sad eruptions. That did negative damage there.
They're gonna survive.
Really, really smart Last Respects, though. I love that play from Riley, because if Typhlosion doesn't Terastallize, obviously it gets knocked out with that Ghost typing. But even if you just barely miss this KO here, you put Basculegion in a position where it is still it's still here, right? You still have 3 Pokemon, and when you're playing a match like this where the weather control can be so important, that is major. You can pretty easily switch out Pelipper here if you want to make sure you keep the rain up, because that Basculegion didn't take extra recoil from that Wave Crash.
And Last Respects was going to have boosted power because that Archaludon went down so early. And yeah, I absolutely love that. You still have this Life Orb recoil that you're going to have to take, but you have the opportunity here to just keep going for something like those Last Respects. You've got the Torkoal, though, to help shut off the rain for now, but this Pelipper can actually still do some work.
It can.
If it's not careful, you can go for Fire-type Weather Balls, but Riley's going to think better of that and just switch the Amoonguss in instead.
Amoonguss does hit the field. The Basculegion, I imagine, probably protects itself this turn just to make sure that Riley can maintain those 3 Pokemon left. If you are Riley, next turn becomes a pretty easy opportunity to swap Pelipper into that Basculegion slot and let Amoonguss survive. It should be faster than Torkoal, unless these Torkoal and Amoonguss are trained kind of differently than we're normally used to. So Amoonguss, again, they took a decent chunk from that Life Orb Dragon Claw, but shouldn't be knocked out by a second attack, which means that something could get put to sleep here.
Starting to get really tense. Riley may have been able to find a way back into this series and take us to a game number 3. But every single decision is going to matter when you are this close to the finish line to make it to the finals of a regional championship. And so they're going to take their time. They don't want to make a mistake here.
One wrong move could be the end of your tournament life, especially if you are Riley in this case. Down a game here in top 4. Amoonguss will swap out, not the Basculegion actually, so the Basculegion gets the Swift Swim reactivated right away and should get able to fire off one more attack. If Joe protected either of these Pokemon, it might come down to which gets hit, but Wave Crash comes through. There will be a knockout this turn, and Torkoal will not be able to reset the sun.
And that Garchomp KO is huge. This Basculegion was going to go down regardless because of the Life Orb recoil, the Rough Skin recoil, or even just the recoil it's taking from that Wave Crash damage. And you're right, it comes down to this Pelipper and this Amoonguss. The problem is that Hisuian Typhlosion, it was able to reset its choice specs. If it wanted to, it could go for something like a Heat Wave instead. And especially if Torkoal can get the knockout here, but it cannot. This Burning Jealousy is still not going to do enough to get rid of this Pelipper.
Pelipper hangs on. Amoonguss got to activate its regenerator as well. So thanks to the rain being up, even though this Typhlosion has the choice specs, has the Terrifier, Amoonguss is nearly at full HP. And we're going to have to see whether or not the Typhlosion has enough juice to knock out the Amoonguss with a choice specs Terrifier overheat possibly coming out from this Typhlosion.
Yeah, before this Pelipper maybe gets knocked out as well. This is such a tough position to be in. I mean, the Pelipper can still just go for a Weather Ball here.
It can. You have the option to go for Helping Hand here, and Helping Hand overheat, I think probably knocks out Amoonguss, but then you leave yourself in a position where this Typhlosion will be at -2. Pelipper probably knocks it out with Weather Ball, and if you're using Helping Hand with Torkoal, you're not getting any damage out onto the Pelipper, so the Pelipper can just finish off the Torkoal after that. Josie really needs to get this turn correct to have a shot at winning this game against Riley, who has positioned his Pokemon very well.
Oh, the Protect onto the Pelipper. If there's no Protect from this Amoonguss, it's just going to have to take both of these attacks so that Hisuian Typhlosion is able to hit the overheat into the Amoonguss, and it's just going to take it out in one hit.
Oh, that's huge. The Pelipper protecting there means no damage being dealt by Riley this turn. Even with the rain, the Typhlosion has enough power to take out the Amoonguss on Riley's side of the field. That should secure this game for Joe. Not to jinx anything. Maybe an overheat miss.
Overheat can miss.
I'm not willing it. I'm so sorry if this happens. Joe, I'm praying with you.
He's putting his hands together.
There
He's
it
hoping
is.
that's going to be enough, but the Typhlosion does land the overheat, and with one more KO, Joseph Ugarte finds himself in another finals of a Pokemon Regional Championships.
What an impressive set from Joe. He lost that Jumpluff on turn 1 both games and ended the game with Torkoal sitting on the field in the rain for a few turns, but showing that, hey, I don't need the sun up. I can have my rainy days and still come out on top. Really impressive match there. Of course, congrats to Riley on a fantastic top 4 finish, but Joe just showing his experience with that Torkoal and Jumpluff combination was enough to carry him to victory.
The sun is shining here in Louisville, Kentucky, as we keep this top cut rolling.